Blog Talk Radio.
County 23, I'll give you corrected address. So you have a fire in a one-story ordinary. Looks like it's about 40 by 120 to 125. We'll get your traffic control. Squad 5, Squad 5. Over to 273-273. Over Battalion 18th Battalion. Over to 273-273.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Fire Engineering Talk Radio and another installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. I'm your host, Tom Merrill, and today is Tuesday, December 15th, 2015. Wait a minute, let me read. Is that, yes, it is December 15th. The year is quickly closing, and Christmas and the holiday season is fast approaching. I don't know where the time went, but anyway, I want to thank you for taking the time to listening in or downloading this episode and listening in at another time. But thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much for your interest in the Professional Volunteer Fire Service and things we can all do to make our departments, our operation, and our firefighters even more professional, because as we like to say every show, professional has nothing to do with earning a paycheck and everything to do with attitude and commitment and dedication, and obviously just the fact that you're a volunteer firefighter in no way means you cannot be a professional firefighter. And if you'd like to call in tonight, I'll give you the number a few different times, but again, the number is 760-454-8852. Feel free to call in and talk about what's going on in your hometown. Feel free to talk about your feelings on the Professional Volunteer Fire Service, the fire service in general, or when we get into our conversation with our guest in a little bit, feel free to call in and talk about emergency vehicle operations or anything else that's on your mind. We encourage you, 760-454-8852, and as I said, holy smokes, 2015 fast coming to a close. That holiday season is in full swing, and I want to wish you and all your loved one and all your brother and sister firefighters and everybody involved in your firefighting operation a happy and healthy holiday season. And 2016 will be here before you know it, and I'm going to be in a busy start right at the beginning of the year. I've been going around doing my Professional Volunteer Fire Department presentation and kicking off 2016, hitting the road a little bit, doing the presentation throughout my local area, as well as east of me in Suffolk County. I'll be there in mid-January, and looking forward to it. Looking forward to going out and meeting firefighters and just talking about this great fire service of ours and sharing stories and sharing all this great things going on in the volunteer fire service. And speaking of things going on, even though the calendar says it's December 15th, which means we should probably be thinking about winter operations and steps we can be taking in our firehouses to prepare our apparatus to operate better in the inclement weather, although we had 71 degrees here in Buffalo yesterday, which I know is hard to believe, and people were actually out on their jet skis, people were mowing their lawns, and that is something that we just never see in the Buffalo area. As a matter of fact, we are still in the longest snowless stretch in our history. We've never gone this far into December without traces of snow, and we've had no traces of snow yet in Buffalo, but nonetheless, winter will eventually arrive. And just as a reminder, things that you can do in your firehouse to better prepare for fire operations in inclement weather and in the snow. If you want to put rock salt on the rigs or anti-slipping ice on the rigs, because water freezes and it gets very slippery. Good idea to keep some of that in the compartments. Your hydrant markers, are your hydrants marked? Do you have them up? Have you checked them? Make sure your hydrants are adequately marked. And when we're on scene, remember, especially with our new members, to remind them they might want to crack the nozzles so the lines don't freeze, and just be extra careful of those slips and those falls. And if you're going to be out at even a routine call for any extended time, you need to recirculate the water to prevent any ice from maybe forming and hurting your tank and your pump. So maybe we could talk to our guest in a little bit about that too, about things we can do to operate better in the winter. But you know what else you can do with winter fast approaching? We talk at every show about connecting and engaging with your community. And again, it is such an important thing to do. The days of maybe giving an image of a mystique about the firehouse where no one really knows what goes on down there, or only certain people are allowed in the firehouse. Those are long gone. We need to connect with our community because we need them as much as they need us. We need them to support us. We need them to understand what we're doing, what we're all about. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And we've talked in previous shows about fire prevention and going out into the communities at block parties and community events. Well, take the opportunity to maybe put on your social media page some winter safety advice, winter preparation advice, steps that can be taken to better prepare themselves for the inclement weather that might come someday, gathering emergency supplies, making a family emergency communication plan, talking about if they have backup generators, how to operate them safely, how to have the proper amount of carbon monoxide detectors, where to put them. There's so many things that you can be talking about, so many things you can be teaching about safety and being better prepared, and at the same time selling your image as a professional operation, a professional department. It's just another small way to do it. Something to think about. So yes, you may be thinking, okay, I need to make my firefighters better prepared, but take the opportunity, make your community better prepared, and at the same time sell that professional image. And you're not making it up. I'm not trying to say that you're trying to portray a professional image and you're not. By no means. You're just creating awareness as to how professional your operation is and how concerned you are with your community. Some things to consider. Also this time of year, I know it's election season. I know a lot of new officers are being elected, have been elected, and that's been a common theme on my Facebook page. And as a reminder, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department is a Facebook page. I encourage you to like it. I'm always posting current events and stories and tidbits and information, and also my personal feelings on certain things that go into making a professional operation. And over the last couple of weeks, I've hit hard and heavy on officer and leadership development and officer and leadership information and things I've learned and things that have been brought to my attention about being a good, well-rounded officer and being a leader. There's a difference between the two. An officer should definitely be a leader. A leader doesn't necessarily have to be an officer, but we can all learn great leadership attributes and good leadership qualities. And I've been posting a lot, especially, again, since it's election season. We've got a lot of new people being elected. And even if you've been elected before, the new year is an opportunity to take a step back, to reconnect with your members, to refocus on what's really important. You know, remember that it's about your people, that they come first. And make decisions because they're right, not maybe because they're popular, but because they're right. So many other things. Remember, egos eat brains. Egos eat brains. Stay humble. Stay dialed into current events. Know what's going on in the fire service. Know what's going on in the National Fire Service, your local fire service, the World Fire Service, and know what's going on in your department. Stay connected by being with your people. By being with your people and being humble and training and treating your people with respect. Keep loving the job because, to me, passion goes a lot farther than skills. They say a leader with great passion will always outperform a leader with great skills but no passion. You need to have passion. Things to focus on as the year comes to an end and a new year begins. You know what else is probably one of the biggest things a leader needs to focus on is integrity. You're nothing without your integrity. Once you lose your integrity, once you lose that, it's hard to get it back. Accept and embrace that because it is so true. You will be watched as a fire service leader. People are watching you at all times. They're watching how you react. They're watching how you deal with other people. Accept it, understand it, and learn how to deal with that. Welcome members into your department with diverse backgrounds. It's a different world today. We have all different learning curves, all different education levels, all different personalities. We need to accept these people. We need to bring them into our departments. We certainly can still establish the expectations. We can certainly establish what's expected of their behavior and how they're going to operate and perform in our departments. Show them the way, but give them the tools and equipment to do their job. And those are just a few of the things. We could spend an entire show on that, and we will in the future. I've talked to several fire service leaders who are experts on leadership and have put together great presentations, and we are going to focus on that. But if you're a new leader, start reading, start educating yourself, start looking at how other leaders in our fire service have performed. Learn from the bad, take from the good. You can learn from everybody. You can learn. Everyone's had that boss, that leader, that officer that they didn't like how they did things. Okay, that's fine. Learn from it. What are you going to do a better job? Sometimes you got to deal with bad news, and I just want to point out something that happened the other day, and I think this department and this leader and this chief handled it so well. For those that don't know, there was an ugly incident at one of the departments in Maryland, at the Prince George Department. I don't know all the details. I'm not taking sides. I'm not defending anybody. I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. What I am saying is the chief got a handle on it. He addressed it immediately. There's a great YouTube video out on it. These are the things we can learn without criticizing, how to handle adversity, how to handle sometimes things when they go bad. And I encourage you to look it up. The Prince George County, there was an altercation between some paid firefighters and some volunteer firefighters because it is a combination department. There was an altercation that occurred at a fire, and the chief immediately addressed it with his troops. He apologized to the public. He let his firefighters know that the public has a certain expectation of them. And several times in this video, you hear the chief utter the words that we talk about so much on this show, professionalism. And that's what the public expects, professional and cohesive teamwork, a professional approach to the job. They don't say send a B team or the unprofessional team. They just have this certain level of expectations. In this case, it might not have been met. The chief addressed it immediately. It's a great learning tool because we all will suffer some bad things in our department. We all will have incidents that maybe don't go well or bad behavior. I encourage you to look up Chief Mark Bashor's remarks. They're on YouTube. Prince George County Fire and EMS Department handled extremely well, extremely professional, making a bad situation maybe just a little better by immediately getting in the information he needed, immediately addressing it, not trying to bury it under the carpet, not pretending it didn't happen. Oh, no, addressing it, researching what happened, and addressing it quickly and professionally. Well done. So 2016 is coming. You leaders out there, make it a point to start the year off right, and we can all learn. We're always learning, and there's so much to learn about good leadership and good officer skills. A lot of good reading out there, a lot of books. Feel free to put that on your list for 2016 to make it one of your goals. Hey, you know what else is fast approaching in 2016 is the great FDIC convention, which will be in April. They are doing a fantastic thing this year. Honeywell and DuPont Kevlar have partnered with the leaders at FDIC to award 20 deserving firefighters and first responders with a full paid scholarship. This is airfare. This is accommodations. And they have partnered with Honeywell and DuPont, and they are awarding 20 scholarships to attend FDIC this year. If you know of any deserving candidate, someone that's got notable skills or done notable work in your department, a distinguished leader, someone that's utterly devoted to your department, to your community, please consider recommending them for one of these 20 scholarships. Information on FDIC.com. Finalists are even going to be chosen by those submitting. You'll have a chance to read over the recommendations, the nominees, and you can recommend who you want to win. So 20 full-paid scholarships to FDIC available to a deserving candidate. If you know any in your department, in your community, go to FDIC.com and nominate them because it is the premier training event. It is fantastic. It's a great opportunity to meet and mingle with the fire service legends and icons. It's also some of the best training you will ever get. FDIC.com. And along with FDIC, they're also accepting nominations for an award they give out every year, the Courage and Valor Award, which is in memory of Ray Downey, the great deputy chief from the FDNY who lost his life during the terrorist attacks. Actually, he was murdered on September 11th, 2001 during those attacks. He was probably one of the best-known firefighters in the United States at the time. I'm glad to say his name is still so well recognized. I believe he was a 39-year veteran of the FDNY, one of the most highly decorated firefighters in their history, a leader nationwide, and unfortunately he lost his life in the attacks of September 11th. So they have a Courage and Valor Award named in his honor, and they are accepting nominees for that. And if you know anyone that would fall into that category, somebody who performed above and beyond in the line of duty, please again go to FDIC.com or Google it, the Courage and Valor Foundation Award from Fire Engineering, and you will find all the information on how to submit your nominee. FDIC coming up in April. Be here before you know it. You know, I've talked to about every show about recruitment and retention, which is such a huge thing in the volunteer fire service. We all need more volunteers. We all need good quality volunteers. And again, one of the biggest advocates out there, and I've been saying it for several shows now, one of our best advocates, one of our best supporters, and one of the best resources for all of us volunteers is the National Volunteer Fire Council. And recently they launched a new Make Me a Firefighter recruitment campaign. It just launched on December 1st. And what you want to do is you want to go onto their website, you want to find the link to the Make Me a Firefighter recruitment campaign, and you want to make sure that your department is registered, because that'll open you up to a host of tremendous resources to help you maybe recruit more members. It'll feature your department in their database. It'll make it searchable. There'll be profiles of volunteers who maybe have applied for opportunities in your area that you can follow up with. There's customized campaign materials, posters, and handouts where you can customize them for your own department. There's going to be all sorts of tips and tools and training aids to make your department's recruitment and retention efforts maybe more successful. And that's all available through the National Volunteer Fire Council's website. Again, you just put that in Google. It'll come right up for you. And there's just a great amount of information on that website. And we could all use more members. We could all use more good quality members. And this is certainly a step in the right direction in helping address those recruitment and retention needs. So kudos to the National Volunteer Fire Council. They're always doing something to help us out. And if you're not a registered member of that association, I recommend you do that as well. It is fantastic. Hey, the grants, the Assistance to Firefighter Grant application period is now underway. I believe that opened last week, and it'll be open through January 15th. And there's lots of information on how to get assistance with that as well. FEMA has some great information if you go to the FEMA website. But again, the 2015 Assistance to Firefighter Grant application period is now open. And there's going to be workshops and information available through FEMA. And again, if you want more help, you can go to the FEMA homepage at FEMA.gov, and you can push /fire grants, and it'll come right up. But again, something to consider. There's been some great grants awarded over the years, and they give you a limited time to do it. I believe it closes around January 15th. So FEMA website, a great place to start in getting your grant application started and processed, and I would encourage you to do that. You know, there's been a few new laws that have hit the volunteer fire service throughout the country, and I try to stay on top of this for the show, and obviously we could spend an entire show maybe on things in each state, but a couple big ones that have hit recently. In Oklahoma, they had a new law take effect for all you Oklahoma volunteer firefighters. You can now recruit, speaking of recruitment, you can now recruit volunteers over the age of 45, over the age of 45. There was an age limit that was put in place years ago, and that was due to a pension problem, and the new law gives volunteers the option to join without signing on to the pension. There's firefighters, men and women, who like to serve, even if they have to do so without a pension, so that law was established to open the door for them. Evidently, they capped it at 45 in the years past because they didn't want people joining and grabbing a pension right away. So this is giving them the opportunity to join without taking a pension. New law that took effect back on November 1st in the Oklahoma area. And unfortunately, some bad news for volunteer firefighters out of the North Carolina area. In the area of Parkton, North Carolina, firefighters were responding to emergency calls, and while they were gone, their homes were burglarized. And that's terrible to think about. I think it would be easy to do if you're a criminal listening to a scanner or knowing when they're going out on calls and then watching to see if the firefighter leaves. So they were having a real problem with that in the North Carolina area. And just something to be aware of. I hate to say it, it's just a different world today, but make sure you're locking your house up real good when you leave for these calls, especially if nobody's home, because there are some nuts out there that'll do things like this, and this was news out of the Parkton, North Carolina area about a month ago, and hopefully maybe they've caught the people by now. But again, just an awareness. We talk about the importance of staying in tune and aware of what's going on in the fire service, and this is one of those things that I hate to say it, but it's happening, and a great reminder to lock up as you leave and have diligence as to what's going on around your house and your neighborhood. And some other things happen in the New York area in my hometown that I'd like to share with you. And we have a case going on right now in a county or two over from me where a volunteer firefighter is actually being taken to court. He's being prosecuted because he was collecting workers' compensation for being injured several years ago or a few years ago at his job, but he continued to respond to calls as a volunteer firefighter. And officials are having a problem with that, and they are actually charging him, and he has been in court saying that he should not be collecting over $40,000, I believe, in workers' comp claims over the last couple of years while he's able to go to fire calls. And again, there's a lot of things to shake out of this. I don't know all the details. This has just been some headlines in my area, but it's something to watch. Maybe he's responding more in a support role. Maybe he is doing things that don't involve anything strenuous and just supporting the firefighters at scene by bringing refreshments. I don't know the details, but it just points out that that's something that we should watch. If you're on disability from your job or collecting workers' comp, people might be watching to see if you're still going to calls, and they might have a problem with it if they see that you are. And that is something that's happening right now in a couple counties over from me, actually. And I'm definitely going to watch and see how that shakes out. And we had some late-breaking news just today that came across at our firehouse, and again, it concerns New York State. Now, New York State has a provision for volunteer firefighters to receive a pension if it's enacted in the department's area. Length of Service Award Program is what it's called, and it has a provision that at a certain age determined by the municipality, volunteer firefighters can receive a pension based on their years of service. However, the way it was originally drafted, it prohibited volunteers who were paid employees of a political subdivision from earning this credit for calls if they were on the job in their political subdivision working for, say, a town highway department or a police department or any other political subdivision type job in their area. They couldn't get service credit if they happened to go to an emergency call. We actually have in our computer system for tracking people's attendance, there was actually a way to differentiate if people were on the job, and it would give them credit maybe from their department for going to the call, but it wouldn't enter them into the database for credit for the pension program. That has now been amended just this week, I believe. New York State Governor Cuomo signed off on it, and now volunteer firefighters who are also employees of these political subdivisions will be able to receive credit for any firefighter activities they're doing while doing their regularly assigned paid work. So this was after December 11th, 2015, brand new, so it just hit a couple days ago, and that's good because we have a lot of people that work for highway departments and Department of Public Works and other areas of political subdivisions, and they were not allowed to get service credit for their pension program, and now they are in New York State. So, and New York State did a few other things too. Governor Cuomo a month ago signed another law that we're going to talk about in a little bit on the show, but it's requiring all volunteer firefighters and EMS personnel to wear seat belts while operating emergency vehicles. I believe that just passed recently back in November, and I think that's great. It happened on November 20th. A new law, it amended the New York State Motor and Vehicle Traffic Law, took effect immediately. Again, all firefighters and EMS personnel in New York State are to wear seatbelts while operating volunteer fire and or ambulance vehicles. So there is an exception if they're providing patient care in a rear compartment of an ambulance. So a few exceptions to it. And also we're going to talk to our guest tonight about that as well, because I believe that's only applying to the volunteers. I don't think it applies to the paid departments, but we should be belted up. I think that's one of the best things we can do for us. And another area of concern when it comes to vehicle operations is when we drive our personal vehicles. You know, a lot of departments have maybe good, solid driver training programs and think they're doing a really good job instructing their members about emergency responses in the fire apparatus. And sometimes, to me, one of the overlooked areas is in our personal vehicle. And again, the National Volunteer Fire Council has stepped forward along with the International Association of Fire Chiefs, and they put together a new booklet, Let's Make a Difference. And it's got model policies and recommendations on what we can do in our departments to help minimize injuries and deaths while responders are using their own personal vehicles responding to calls. 52 volunteers have been killed since 2003 responding to or returning from calls in their personally operated vehicles, and the highest percentage of that is volunteer ranks. And unfortunately, here's a sad thing, 32% of those killed were 21 years of age or younger. So again, the International Association of Fire Chiefs and the National Volunteer Fire Council have partnered. They've put together this new report, and there's some great information. And again, you can download that. It's available. Let's Make a Difference, and you can do that right on the National Volunteer Fire Council website page at nfc.org, and you can find it right on there. And that is another added to the to-do list for the coming year, because we certainly have enough on our plate, and sometimes the overlooked thing is driver training and apparatus and emergency vehicle response safety. And I think we talked a month or two ago on the last show that the official stats came out for line-of-duty deaths last year, and the good news is it went way down, 64 official line-of-duty deaths, so that's great. And again, out of those 64, 34 were volunteers, so there's some concern there. And again, sudden cardiac events are still looming large, and we focused last show on steps we can take to make ourselves maybe just a little healthier, take better care of ourselves. And the good news is the road vehicle crash fatality rate, which in years past was often, I believe, second most frequent cause of firefighters. There were only 7 fatalities, and I say only with an asterisk next to it because only 7 is still too many. It is the second lowest number of deaths, I believe, over the last 30 years. So we're seeing an increase on driver training. We're seeing an increase maybe on awareness and education. We're seeing an increase with our politicians taking note and helping enacting some of these new rules, and some of our fire service organizations getting involved, such as National Volunteer Fire Council, such as the International Association of Fire Chiefs. So we're seeing it. More attention is being directed that way, and hopefully we can have even more attention drawn to it tonight. I'm pleased to welcome my guest, who I've been trying to get on this show for, half a year now. I think we first talked over a year ago, and schedules are crazy for both of us, and I'm just so excited to have him on tonight. And I really want to welcome Mike Wilbur, who is nationally recognized. He's in the professional service delivery of emergency vehicle operations, apparatus placement, and purchasing. And Mike was a volunteer firefighter for many, many years. Also enjoyed a 32 career in the FDNY, where he retired in 2013 as a lieutenant out of 27 truck in the Bronx. He has served on the FDNY Apparatus Purchasing Committee. He's a contributing editor for Firehouse Magazine, Fire Apparatus Journal. He also is the CEO, I believe, of Emergency Vehicle Response and their website, emergencyvehicleresponse.com, which is a fantastic website for anybody looking for information on what they can do in their department to bring awareness to this subject and to maybe learn from mistakes that have been made by others and also learn from the good things people have done, please check it out. Tons of information on that website, and tons of information and articles on engine ops and ladder truck operations and accident reports and so much more. Mike, I could spend all day talking about what you have done, but I just want to start off by welcoming you to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you very much, Chief. It's my pleasure and a privilege. And yes, we tried for a long time to get together, and finally it's all worked out. And what a great way to wrap up 2015 and head into the new year with us doing a show together. So really grateful and honored that you asked me to be on your show.
Well, the stars align tonight. The stars align, and we got you. So if anybody wants to call in, again, the number is 760-454-8852, and this is Fire Engineering Talk Radio, the Professional Volunteer Fire Department. And tonight we're going to talk about how part of the professional equation is driving emergency vehicles in a safe and prudent manner, educating our members on how to properly drive their personal vehicles as well in a safe and prudent manner, steps we can take on scene to perform more safely. But before we even get into that, Mike, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you wouldn't mind, you have served in arguably the most well-known department in the entire world, that being the FDNY. But you've also been a volunteer firefighter for a very, very long time. I would like to get your buy-in, and folks, I didn't talk to him about this ahead of time, to support the message that I'm trying to get out there and is supported by so many of our listeners, that professionalism has nothing to do with earning a paycheck. You've served on both. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And it's something that I have professed for a very long time over my career. And like you, I am on the circuit and go to any number of firehouses and fire halls throughout our great nation, and have actually been as far west as the island of Guam and been up into Canada. And professionalism has absolutely nothing to do with collecting a paycheck. I have been to some career departments that couldn't get professional if you spotted them, the P in professional, that they just couldn't do it. And yet I've been to a number of volunteer installations where, like you say, professionalism isn't about a paycheck. It's about a culture. It's about an attitude. It's about desire to want to do this and do it well, and all those things. And so I am a big proponent of professionalism. I think we should all strive for it. And again, many in the volunteer sector have run really professional operations over time.
Oh, fantastic! I'm glad I knew you shared that thought, and it could help me get that message out. So, folks, if you don't want to listen to me say it anymore, Tom Merrill from Little Snyder Fire Department in Amherst, New York, where, by the way, it was 71 degrees yesterday. Thank you. If you don't want to hear it from me, take it from a retired member of the biggest department in the world, that professionalism is everything about attitude and commitment and dedication. So listen to that from Michael. And Mike, if you wouldn't mind, how did you get involved in the fire? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got involved in the fire service.
Unlike a lot of people that grew up as a child playing with fire trucks and yearning to be a firefighter, that wasn't the case for me at all. I turned 18 years old. At that time, I had no desire to go to college. I went to my high school graduation. The next night, we had a party and partied way too much. And the next morning, I got up, and my father was there, and he said, "We're going to have a talk." I said, "Okay." He said, "You realize you're going to have to do two things." And I said, "Well, I realized one." I said, "I have to get a job now." And he said, "Yes, and the other is that you have to join the volunteer firehouse." And I said, "Why would I want to do that, hang out with a bunch of drunks and blow sirens and air horns and all that stuff. And he said, if you want to live here anymore, you will join up. And I said, where's the application? So I joined up, and certainly it was probably the defining moment in my life, a gift that my father gave me that continues to this day to still keep giving. I joined the volunteer firehouse, went to training, went to some fires. I always knew I wanted to help people and knew I wasn't necessarily bright enough or had the stick-to-itiveness to become a doctor or anything like that. And it just kind of suited me to a T. And then after a while, some people recruiting for the local community college came around and said, do you want to go to college for fire protection technology? And I said, sure, that's a great idea. So I started going nights and then worked hard in the daytime at my full-time job and saved up and went full-time. And while I was there, I met people who had moved to upstate New York, not nearly as far as you, obviously, but I live 77 miles northwest of New York City. And there were folks from the city that moved up to the country to raise their families and for a better life that were FDNY members. And they were Vietnam vets. And they were going to college with us, taking fire protection technology on the GI Bill. We called it Scholars for Dollars. And there were 5 of us around the same age that were all volunteers. And we all got applications from those guys, and they mentored us, and all 5 of us passed and got on the job. And one of them is fairly well known, John Che Jonas, who survived the attacks at the World Trade Center. You may remember that story.
The Miracle of Ladder Company 6.
Right, exactly. And Jay and I go back way to college days, and we actually studied together along with Chief Salka. I was in pretty good company there.
Yes, you were.
I got promoted to lieutenant. I didn't make chief like either one of those guys, but they drugged me along in spite of myself, and I got promoted to lieutenant. But every one of the 5 volunteers that went to college with the Scholars for Dollars Vietnam vet FDNY guys went on to have just wonderful careers. And again, just another blessing, and couldn't thank those guys enough for that opportunity. And that's kind of how my whole career, regardless of writing or being a volunteer firefighter or a career firefighter, has been just so much of an accident or happenstance or divine intervention or whatever you want to call it, but certainly nothing at all planned out, just kind of took each day as it came, and really enjoyed my time as a volunteer and as a career member of the fire service, and continue this day to enjoy the fire service immensely. And people said, well, when are you going to retire from teaching and doing your business? And I said, well, when I feel irrelevant or I can't contribute and make it better anymore, then it's probably going to be time to hang it up. But as long as there's a need, and as long as I feel, that I'm contributing and helping to make it better, why I still want to do that.
Yeah, and you're certainly, the classes that you teach and the articles that you write and the passion that you have, I think you're going to be doing it for a long, long time based on the attendance and feedback and interest people have. So, I mentioned earlier too, when I was introducing you and talking about some of the new legislation and that. So there might be an increased awareness that we're seeing, and hopefully there is. But it seems not a day goes by that we don't read something about a near miss or an unfortunate tragedy or an apparatus accident. Heck, I think wasn't Philadelphia just a couple of weeks ago? They had an aerial truck roll over, and Atlanta a few weeks before that, and it just doesn't end, does it? And it's something that we need to be focusing on.
Yeah. You know what I always thought, it was kind of funny. I just have these moments where I get lucid thoughts, and I said, geez, why is it the thing that we use the most, the truck, we train with the least, and the things that we use the least, like Hearst tools and hose lines and portable ladders and SCBA, we train with the most. And if you think about it, the next run you go out on, you may or may not use an SCBA. You may or may not use a Hearst tool or a Jaws of Life. You may or may not use a hose line, but that next run, for sure, somebody has to jump. In the case of a volunteer, behind the wheel of their personal car, go to a firehouse and potentially jump behind the wheel of an emergency vehicle. And yet the hours of training that we allot to this very important task are far less than almost all the other disciplines that we have in the fire service. And I guess that's a unique perspective.
I'm wondering, and you're so right, and I'm trying to figure out why that might be. And one of the things I can think of is because we've always done it this way, and so firefighter A teaches firefighter B. Firefighter B takes over for firefighter A someday, now teaches firefighter C. Firefighter C takes over for firefighter A someday. There's maybe been no change in the structured program that they've had. It's probably hard to get the information. So we cover the same thing every generation, I guess. But where do you start?
Well, I think one of the things certainly is it's just cultural. In this country, as a teenager, it's like an American birthright that you go drive something. And so when you reach the firehouse, that there's almost an extension of that. And of course, once you reach the firehouse, you have potentially driven a private car or pickup truck for a while, and so you know how to drive, and so that's kind of the attitude. Well, everybody knows how to drive, and that's the industry, the manufacturing industry, has made it so much easier. We always joke in class, automatic transmissions. I'll ask you the question. Are automatic transmissions good or bad in fire apparatus?
My answer, based on my experience, would be good.
Well, they're good. Why?
Because you don't have to do any thinking. You just drive.
Why else are they good? Because anybody can do it. Why are automatic transmissions bad? Because anybody could do it. Back in the days when I broke in driving trucks, my first truck that I learned on was a 1947 Mack. It was a double clutch and son of a gun with Armstrong steering. For those of you less than 30 years old, it had a magneto, and you have no clue what that even is. It had dual ignition. If you missed a gear, you promptly went to the side of the road, put it in neutral, and started over, because there was no way that you were going to recover from that. And I got to thinking about that, and if you look back in time, that was actually a test and an eliminator, because back in those days, if you couldn't make the truck do that, then you probably had no business behind the wheel, and you were eliminated from driving that piece. And so we kept potentially a lot of bad or poor operators, all with good intentions, but unable to do it out from behind the wheel. And now, we have automatic transmissions. And again, we wouldn't be able to survive now. You talked about recruitment and retention. Young people that we are getting as new drivers and new candidates, quite frankly, don't know how to shift anything. Everything they've ever driven is automatic. And so we would have a lot less response now if it wasn't for automatic transmissions. But that's kind of the good and the bad of that particular component on a fire truck. And so we have this overwhelming birthright cultural thing that everybody drives and everybody knows how to drive. When I started, I started as a volunteer in 1974, and the NFPA started keeping statistics in, I believe, 1978, and there were like 177 line-of-duty deaths, and of course many of them behind the wheel of either private cars or fire trucks, or falling off of them, again, back in the days of riding in the back step and open cabs and the like. So the statistics that you just quoted, where we are now less than 70 line-of-duty deaths, is in the span of 30 years of training, awareness, better apparatus, better safety devices on the apparatus are all paying big dividends, and a lot of firefighter lives have been saved, and I think we should all be very proud of that accomplishment. As you know, a radio host, as a fire service leader, to have me on your show and talk about this, certainly not the most exciting subject, but yet in many cases it's the most deadly. Some years,
and something done every day, as you said. You might not use that hose line or SCBA, but we're rolling rigs every day. Right,
and you know, it's just it's just a matter of fact that not everybody doing it knows what they're doing, and you don't know what you don't know. And another interesting comment that you made is about how the information's passed down. And I learned something. I've been around a long time, and I continually to learn. Each class I give is better than the last one, because the last one I learned something, and I'm able to pass that along to the next group. But one thing I learned, I had a young man. He was in my ladder class. He had a 1999 aerial truck that he brought to class, and I asked him how to set it up. And he had gotten hired on his job. He was a career person in 2006. And he basically explained to me the wrong way to do it. And I said, well, where did you get that from? Well, I got it from the senior guy on the truck. And one of the things that I always push for, particularly with aerial trucks, is that every member in the department that's expected to drive and operate the truck needs to have their own personal copy of the operator's manual. Not the owner's manual that's like 5 4-inch binders full of techno jargon and drawings, but the operator's manual. The first half of that book is the nuts and bolts on how you set up and operate your aerial truck. And I said, you know, to the young man, I said, now do you really want to know how to operate your truck and to set it up? And what I taught him out of his own operator's manual was far different than the way that he learned and information passed along. So that's part of the problem. Again, the road's paved with good intention, and people trying to pass information along may not necessarily be passing the correct information along. And, of course, like you said, that may go on for several decades or several generations of firefighters, and all of a sudden you have a pretty screwed up place with pretty screwed up policies and procedures because we've always done it that way.
Yeah, so I guess then, you know, you had a good article last month, Real Driver Training Matters, a great article about the two different ways that we can train our people. One, the cover your ass approach, and the other is a good, solid training approach. And I guess to start, it's up to department leaders to maybe recognize this is something they need to concentrate on. But if these department leaders were like that young firefighter that you worked with, nothing bad, he had all good intentions, but if they're learning wrong, where do they start? Do they bring in the experts? Someone's got to take the time and to bring these people in maybe and start compiling this information and doing it right?
Well, I think that's it. And, of course, we live in the great state of New York. And one of the things that I also went on to say in that article is that good training, just like good anything else in this country, costs money. In the state of New York, we're spoiled because much of the training that particularly on the volunteer side, but it's a career too, is paid for by the state. And so there's this belief throughout the New York State fire service land that the training's free. Well, good training is not free, just like good fire trucks aren't free. Good books on the subject aren't free. Well, good training isn't free, and good training costs money. And I'm dealing with a situation now where a department spent the better part of $1.4 million on a new ladder truck, and now we're balking at a legitimate price for training. They felt it was too much. And yet when they were sitting with the fire truck salesmen and, we want 2 of these and 3 of these and 4 of these, spending somebody else's money wasn't necessarily a concern. And now it comes to the training, and again, particularly in our state, where much of the training is free, and now you ask somebody to pay for it, and it becomes a much different discussion, unfortunately.
And you can see how that would happen.
You spend all that money for the truck, and yet the most important part of that new fire truck that they bought is the person behind the wheel. And if you're not willing to take 1% of the purchase price of that truck and set it aside to properly train the most important part of it, then there's no discussion really to be had. It kind of is what it is.
You come up with the money for all the bells and whistles.
Right. Yeah. Well, and we had talked about that earlier. How, we'll want the latest and greatest widget on it and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars for it, and yet when it comes to the person behind the wheel, driving trucks that are now 60, 70, one we just did was almost 84,000 pounds, by volunteer firefighters that arguably may only drive the truck once or twice a month, if that.
Right.
And almost to a point, it's a recipe for disaster. I think the other thing that I'd like to mention, because you mentioned earlier in your show, is leadership. One of my favorite leaders, as it relates to driving fire apparatus, is Chief Charles Hood. Chief Hood is the chief of the San Antonio Fire Department. A few years ago, one of his aerial trucks was rolled over, and part of it was caught on security videotape where they were actually, it appeared to be racing the engine on the call and almost rolled over onto a car, stopped at a stop sign as they were rounding a curve. And Chief Hood, after that, took a leadership role, and all 1,600 employees of the San Antonio Fire Department were made to come on his time to come view the wrecked apparatus that sits to this day out in front of their training academy as a constant reminder of what can happen when you don't take the job seriously and you don't take driving seriously and you do silly things like race and speed and folks without seatbelts. And the penalties that he gave out, I believe, and don't quote me now, but trying to recall, the driver got like 45 days, and the officer got 30 days without pay, and the other firefighter behind the officer got 15 days without pay for failing to wear a seatbelt. And the new guy, the rookie on the truck, the chief felt that his injuries he sustained by not having a seatbelt on and following the lead of his contemporaries were punishment enough for him. And he basically took a leadership role here and said, hey, it's unacceptable to wreck my fire truck. And we're not going to put up with it here. And you're not going to race the trucks. And you're not going to run without seatbelts on. And we're going to draw the line in the sand here. And we're going to make an example of you because you put yourself in a position to be made an example of. And then within a couple years after that, in another really revolutionary kind of move, there were any number of off-duty San Antonio firefighters getting caught DWI. And Chief Hood, again, wrote a letter to his people. And I got to read that letter, and it was really remarkable because he talked about his love of his firefighters and officers, the love of the city, and the love of the civilians that they protect. And he said, I love you so much, and in some cases, maybe I love you even more than you love yourself. We can't continue to operate vehicles under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So we have an amnesty program. Come in and get help. If you get caught the first time, you're going to go away to rehab for 30 days. If I catch you, if you're caught again, you're going to be fired. You're going to be fired. And
that's true leadership.
It is, and it's hard. It's easy to be a bad leader and just look the other way. It's hard to be a good leader and really care about your people and be willing to make the tough choices, just like Chief Bayshore, which you so eloquently mentioned at the top of the show. Chief Bayshore is a friend. My son Nick is a volunteer in Company 12 in Prince George's County at College Park. And Chief Bayshore, again, as you so eloquently put, is the same kind of leader as Chief Hood. And both have all the admiration and respect that I can muster for each of those folks, because they really care about their people, they care about their communities, they care about the job, and they care enough that they're willing to make the tough choices to keep their people alive. And sometimes as an officer, whether it's a chief officer, a company officer, or even as a trainer like us, sometimes you have to protect people, firefighters, from themselves. We've always done it that way. Well, just because you've done it wrong for 50 years, don't make it right now. It just means that you've lucked out and happened to get away with it for the last 50 years.
Yep.
It has nothing to do with anything other than just being lucky.
And I said right at the beginning, step one of this whole process is to get department leaders to understand the importance of this subject and to embrace it, and to maybe take a step back and re-examine how they're doing things. And one of the things that I like to see departments do is a regular recertification program. In some cases, we qualify members to drive apparatus, and that's it. And like most departments, we all have regular drivers. We all have that guy or gal that happens to live right next door to the firehouse or is retired and up at the firehouse all the time, and he's always there getting the rig out. And he or she might do a really good job with it. And maybe they do understand the things we're talking about. But then one day, somebody else happens to be up there getting ice out of the ice machine or washing their car, and the call comes in, and that regular driver's not there. So now this other person who maybe hasn't driven in 6 months, 8 months, maybe a couple of years, now it's up to them. And I know they might not admit it, but going through their mind is, holy crap, am I ready? That, to me, illustrates the reason we need to have recert programs in our volunteer firehouses.
I absolutely agree. And the small volunteer department that I came from in Howells had an amazing driver trainer, and it wasn't me. It was a senior guy, and his whole reason for being there at that point in time was he was the head driver trainer. He was a past commissioner. He was a past chief. He had spec'd out and worked on the committee for all 4 trucks in the fleet. He was intimately familiar with driving and pumping them. And if you wanted to learn how to drive them, anybody that was a certified driver could help you, but ultimately it was his decision. He was kind of the judge, jury, and executioner. And part of his program as far as recertification was that we would have driver drills. Monday night was firehouse night in our volunteer fire department. The first Monday was meeting night. The second Monday was company drill. The third Monday was fire commissioners meeting, and the fourth Monday was driver's drill. And the driver's drill was no more than 120 minutes. It was 2 hours, and it was all about driving and operating the trucks, pumping them, driving them. If you came to 6 driver drills out of the month, at the end of the year, you didn't have to recertify on the vehicles because you had touched them and driven them 6 times out of the last 12 months. In the case of me, who was on the road all the time, I would have to go to the head driver trainer in December, and I would have to drive and pump the trucks to get recertified for the next calendar year so that I could drive again. It was an excellent program, really well thought out, and done well.
Yeah, sounds like it. So consider good driver research programs. Now, some departments have trouble because they have heavy rescues, light rescues, ladders, and engines, and to try and get someone to do all those in 1 year could be cumbersome for a volunteer. So I know one solution for some companies is they have to do at least 1 or 2 of the rigs every year, and they can't do the same one the following year.
Right, that's a good idea, and that kind of brings up. I'm glad you mentioned all the different kinds of apparatus because that brings up something that I learned while we were doing fleet evaluations. We go in and crawl under, over, and through each fire truck as part of a fleet evaluation, and then we put the department on a program replacement schedule so that they can keep their equipment up to date. But while doing that, I asked the chief, I said, how many certified drivers do you have on your 2 modestly equipped engines, which had 190 to 200-inch wheelbases? And he says, I have 22 drivers for my engines. Wow, that's great. I said, how many do you have for your tandem axle mid-mount aerial tower Quinn? He said 8. And I said, well, how many do you have for your tandem axle all-steer pumper tanker foam unit? And he said 4. And I caution every fire chief that's going to buy a new apparatus in the next year or 2. Look around you and think about who's going to drive it. Okay? Young people, their idea of an oil change now is going to Jiffy Lube or Valvoline. A dipstick is a friend that's kind of a clown.
So true.
Right? They really have no idea. And some of the apparatus that we're buying is so intimidating and so large and so heavy that a lot of these young people have, not only don't they want to drive it, they have no intentions of driving it.
Totally intimidated.
Totally. And it's a big issue. It's a big issue moving forward. I had a friend of mine, a chief locally here, and he was talking about buying a tandem axle pumper tanker as his first out unit. And I said the same thing to him. I said, Chief, look around you. Who's going to drive this? I said, wouldn't it be better to get 1,000 gallons on a single axle engine on a modest wheelbase that everybody can pretty much drive and get that first unit on the road and get some help to people and get some order on the fire, and then maybe later on think about buying something a little bit larger as more of a support apparatus. And he hadn't thought about that, and really thanked me for my commentary.
Yeah, and when you talk about the new people, one of the problems I see, and I wrote about this, and I'd like to hear your opinion if you've observed this. In some areas of the country, again, a lot of volunteer fire departments are hurting for manpower, and that includes drivers and getting rigs out in a timely manner. So we're anxious to bring in members, And what I'm noticing in some areas, and some companies do an absolutely fantastic job with their driving programs, but in some areas, people they barely have broken in their turnout gear, and we're throwing them behind the wheel of the rig because he happens to be someone that maybe is available during the day or lives close to the firehouse, and we might rush them through quickly with little to no training at all just to start driving, and I've seen that, and that concerns me. It needs to be a structured approach to these training programs, and we really need to think about what we're doing. In some areas, it's 18-year-old kids that have barely been driving their own personal vehicle for a year or two, and now we're putting them behind the wheel of a large fire rig.
And you couldn't be more correct. Years ago, as part of my class, I had a case study on an accident in Tennessee where there was a 19-year-old kid. He had two other kids with him. The seat was removed out of the truck on the right side, and so they were sitting on a milk crate, and he drove it off a bridge onto a set of railroad tracks and was killed. And then they go, look, there's no training, there's no driver training, there's no training records, the vehicle wasn't inspected. It had been an old gasoline tanker that somebody decided to take the gasoline out of it and put water in it because they couldn't afford to do anything else. And the list of sins just went on and on. But at the end of the day, 3 young people lost their lives in that wreck. And, you know, much of it could be, say, the training and the fact that we took somebody that's very young. And I know that my approach to driving as I aged and matured was much different towards the end of my driving career, like in New York City, than it was in the beginning. And I think we do a disservice to try and put young people in that position to rush them along without little or no training. And the apparatus today, you have to admit, with the automatic transmissions and the way they're built, they're not the Mack or the old 8V92 Detroit in the American LaFrance that rattled the windows and was a rattle trap and was a rough rider. Apparatus today lead drivers into a false sense of security because they drive better in most cases than the very cars that the volunteers came to the firehouse in.
Heck, some of them have fantastic sound systems, and I'm not talking for listening to the fire radio either.
Yeah,
I mean, lulling you into complacency.
Absolutely, yes, sir. No question about that. And you know, we take young people, and one of the things that I push for that the NFPA finally adopted is that all fire apparatus need to have the height and the length and the weight somewhere by the automatic transmission selector panel on a sign. And the logic behind that, at least in my eyes, for recommending that was for the 20-something-year-old or the guy that doesn't drive much, like we talked about earlier, gets behind the wheel and sees that red sign, and maybe it's a reminder that, hey, I'm not in my car anymore, that I'm in a big, heavy truck. And, you know, the other thing, too, and we do it in training class, it's easy to get these trucks going 50 or 60 miles an hour. It stinks to try and stop these trucks going 50 or 60 miles an hour.
Mm. Yeah, I remember an old instructor once taking our firefighters out into a safe area where they got on a straightaway and then had them slow down very quickly to point out the shift. This was on the pumpers, and we only carry 500 gallons of water, and you could feel the shift with the water and what it could do to the apparatus.
Yeah, and we did that as well. Anytime I get a run, I do an emergency vehicle operators class for a department, and they have a runway or they have a long abandoned stretch of road like that, you know, and I'm sure that the brakes are okay and that the trucks are sound and that the department's sound. You know, we'll go ahead and do that. We did it as part of a training where we put a cone out, and then 50 feet after that cone, we put additional cones every 50 feet. And the idea was that when you hit that first cone, you were going to be doing 50 miles an hour, and you had to stop the truck as quickly and as efficiently as you could without skidding it out or losing control of the truck. And, of course, that brings up a whole different thing that's happening in the fire service with trucks and with braking and driving. Most fleets today are what I call mixed fleets. Some trucks that were built in the late 80s or early 90s that are still in service don't have anti-lock brakes. Trucks built after the late 90s, by virtue of the standard, have to have anti-lock brakes. And so with that said, there's two totally different ways that you would brake those trucks. If you have a truck obviously equipped with anti-lock brake, you are going to put even firm pressure on the pedal and never let off it. And interesting, with a fire truck versus a car, if you did that in your own private car, you would get a foot massage because there would be a pulsating of the brake pedal. In a fire truck, there is no pulsating. You will not know what's happening. It just does. When you start the truck, if you have confusion as to whether your particular truck you're driving is equipped with anti-lock brakes or not, when you start the vehicle, when you turn the battery switch on, there should be an orange light that will light up on the dash that says ABS. And what it is the anti-lock brake computer doing a self-diagnostic check. And if that light goes out, you have anti-lock brakes. And from a computer or mechanical point of view, there's been very little problems in the last decade with anti-lock brakes. That they just work all the time. For the older truck that's not equipped with anti-lock brakes, if you decide to just mash the brake pedal like you would on an anti-lock brake truck, you're going to lock the wheels up and you're going to get into a skid, and more than likely you're going to flip it over and hit something or hurt somebody. For those trucks, there's a term that we use called threshold braking. And what you should do, what we teach people to do that have trucks that are not equipped with anti-lock brakes, is put pressure on the brake pedal until you sense that one of the wheels are about to lock up, and then you're supposed to get off the brake pedal, realizing that friction is what's going to ultimately stop your truck, and there's a lot less friction when the tire's skidding versus using the brakes. And then you're supposed to get back on the brakes again once the wheels are free spinning. Well, what's threshold braking? That's basically a mechanical way to do what anti-lock brakes are doing automatically.
Yeah. And a reminder there for people, leaders out there and department leaders, know what you have. I bet you a lot of us don't even know maybe what they have in their fleet unless they're fortunate enough to have all new apparatus. It'd be something to verify what your braking systems are and incorporate what Mike just talked about in your training program. And as a reminder, I just want to remind our listeners and anyone else listening later on, this is Fire Engineering Blog Talk Radio, and tonight's installment of the Professional Volunteer Fire Service, and talking about apparatus, emergency apparatus, driving programs and driving safety. And my guest is Mike Wilbur, who just has so much information to share with us, and I'm very grateful to him for being on. And if anybody at all would like to call in, has a question for me or has a question for Mike or looking for some guidance, please feel free. The number 760-454-8852, and we'd love to hear from you. But, Mike, we bring this new member in, and we've got to instruct them. I know some companies like to wait to an older age of 21. I can see the merit in that. Some companies start at 18. But regardless, I'm a fan of, I talked earlier about sometimes just throwing people behind the wheel quickly. I'm a fan of bringing these people in, letting them getting acclimated to the whole fire service for 6 months or a year before I even think of putting them behind the wheel. And even then, I prefer a gradual indoctrination. Maybe start with the smaller SUVs or suburban type vehicle for a period of time, maybe even a year, with a very good driving program outlining rules and regs and things like that, and then maybe gradually moving them up into the bigger apparatus. what do you see how a common way is being done? Or you probably see everything being done out there. What do you prefer?
Well, I think what you just described, Chief, is pretty standard. Where we're going to take a young person and start them out on that SUV or the mini pumper or the brush truck or the squad unit first, and then work our way up into the Class A pumpers, and then finally, the tanker or the aerial or the heavy rescue or even the bigger trucks. So I think I haven't seen too many departments to do that, quite honestly, much different than that. You start with the littlest and work your way up. Let's talk about the age for a minute. There were some people, leaders that would bend the truth a little bit and say, the insurance company won't allow you to drive until you're 21. And in a lot of cases, that wasn't necessarily true. And then there was one time I went to do a seminar, and the chief couldn't wait to tell me that all of his drivers 60 years and older were forbidden from driving now because they were too old. And I promptly counseled that fire chief and said, you need to change that. Run Monday morning, not walk, run, before somebody sues you under the ADA for discriminating against fire truck drivers based on their age. I've met some very young people who are extraordinarily good apparatus operators, and yet I've met some very old people that have been terrible right from day one and continue to be terrible. And so it has almost to a point little to do with age. It has to do with natural ability. It has to do with training. It has to do with the culture of the organization, and that's where you get into that professionalism. If you are a professional organization and you treat this job with the danger and reverence and responsibility that's dictated, that's going to go a long way. And you can't discriminate against anybody because of their age, whether it's young or old. So people would ask, well, how do we get rid of somebody that's bad? Well, if you have a good driver training program, a good recertification program, a good testing program, you will weed bad drivers out. Okay, and that's how you do that. We want to get rid of bad drivers because they are a liability to the organization, to the town, to all that are around them, to my family, to your family. We only want to have, good drivers. And so
that's a huge point, Mike. If you don't mind, 'cause I'd like to talk about that for a second, because we've all had that issue where somebody gets up there in years, and it usually falls to the chief to put his arm around that person to say, we have to pull you off the driving list. What you're saying is you really can't do that without some good, solid testing or reasons or something like that, right? You can't just say, okay, it's 65, you're done driving. You're saying that's a big no-no.
Oh, well, I think it's a lawsuit waiting to happen. I think the courts have been clear on discriminating based on a lot of different ages. Even the airline pilots that have a mandatory retirement of 60, there's always a fight with that, even still. What's in the best interest of society and the flying public versus, what's in the best interest of the employee or the individual pilot. So that's one for the ages, but
but a testing program would weed them out.
Yeah, if you have good testing, good rules, and good leadership that are going to call people out and say, hey, you can't do that. The problem becomes, as you well know, the nepotism, because particularly in the volunteer service, when you have whole families that are involved in that service, and we tend to wave our hand and look the other way because that's somebody's brother or cousin, and we don't want to offend them or cause a rift in the family. So we just let that individual go, feel well in knowing that they shouldn't be driving the truck, and that's a leadership issue. That's a cultural issue. As well.
You're going to have testing and recertification that needs to apply to everybody. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is my strong belief, and I'm proud of my company for doing this. And in our recertification program, nobody gets a pass. Everybody from the chief on down has to recertify. All qualified drivers have to recertify yearly on the apparatus. And
that's the way it should be. Nobody's immune from having a wreck, and that's your way. And what you're doing organizationally by taking that stance is that you are showing your citizens that you protect your town, and if you get jammed up, ultimately you can take this to a court and say, we're doing all we can, and we're doing it right. Many times I'll get calls to work on legal issues with guys that have wrecked, and I don't do that. It's my company's policy. We don't testify in court cases one way or the other. But some of the cases that people call me up, lawyers call me up to, and it's sad because the fire department's a real loser. No training record, guy 21 years old, drove down a hill with the Jake brake on in the rain, 45 mile an hour speed limit, was doing 55 at least, 1.5 lane bridge, cleaned the bridge off and killed a guy on his way home from work, and now there's a lawsuit. No driver training records, no training on the operation of the Jake brake, and when you listen to that scenario and it comes to court, the only recourse that the department and the organization has is to bring their checkbook and ask how much.
Yeah, and you just brought up another point that, in my opinion, another attribute of a professional operation, and I don't care if it's fire service or business or whatever, is good record keeping. And there are so many good programs out there today. I mean, I came into the service into the 80s when everything was in manila folders and file cabinets. But even that worked. It was a good system. But there are great record systems through fire service software. And in my opinion, Chief, I'd like to get you got to document what you're doing. Because if you do even get an offender bender, people are going to want to see what training you've had. And if it's not documented, it never happened. So get in the habit of recording what you're doing and who you're bringing in and where they're going and keeping certificates.
Everything. And when I do my 2-day, 18-hour class, the focus on that is starting a driver folder, whether it's a manila folder still or an electronic one. And every time that person touches the truck, we want a record of it, whether it's going for fuel, whether it's going out training, or it's going to a run. Everything in and around that, okay? If you go to an EVOC class, copy of the certificate in the folder. If you get a medical, a physical, copy of that in the folder. You do a pump operators, copy of that in the folder. You do an aerial operations class, copy of that in the folder. And then what we want to do is have some, and I know that there are companies that actually do this, is that we want to be able to pull your license at least once a year or monitor it constantly to make sure that you have a valid license. If somebody from Snyder, New York, one of your young people goes to the Jersey Shore and gets hooked up for a DWI, they're not going to come back to Snyder and tell everybody in the firehouse, hey, man, I went to the Jersey Shore and I got a DWI. when are you going to know? Right? When are you going to know? You're going to know when this individual has an event with the truck, and the local newspaper reporter or TV reporter is going to come knocking on your door and saying, "Did you know that, so and so that wrecked your truck has a DWI?" And if you're not vigilant and you're not doing due diligence here and retrieving those records, you're going to have the answer, "Well, I didn't know." It's your job to know.
And for you New York State listeners, and I don't know if it might be outside of New York State, we call it the LENS program, is one that's utilized License Event Notification System, I believe it stands for. Fantastic program, and what we implemented in my department, and we learned from others, I'm not saying we invented this idea at all, we learned from others, is when somebody comes to us to start driving, they produce their license, we get their license number, and we run it through the License Event Notification System. They sign off saying they agree to it, and if they don't have to, that's fine, but then they're not going to drive for us, and we can choose what we want to know might happen with this driver with their personal vehicle, and it's worked fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We know when they're getting tickets, and we know if other more serious things happen, and we're not looking to throw anybody out. We want to work with them and help them, and maybe even get them help they might need if a pattern develops. But a great idea, Mike.
Yeah, and you have a responsibility, whether you're a fire district commissioner, or you're on the village board, or you're the mayor, or the village or city manager, or whether you're the fire chief or fire commissioner, you have a responsibility to that organization to make, and the community that we serve, to make sure that everybody that gets behind the wheel of that truck is got a valid license, is safe, is going to operate the vehicle safely, and the only way to do that is have this driver's folder. And the last thing, and it's a tough subject to talk about, and we've exempted ourselves from a lot of the very safety rules that everybody else has to adhere to. And I'll ask you a question. In our country, do we have a drug and alcohol abuse problem?
I would say yes.
Yeah, well, where the heck do you think you're getting your volunteer firefighters from? The moon? The same people that we're getting into fire stations are coming from a general population where we have a noted drug and alcohol abuse problem. And what is your organization doing, A, to help these people, and B, find out if you have a problem child?
Right, right. And I hate to say it, and some of our departments were condoning by having bars in our firehouses. And I'm not here to criticize, my own department does. It's the way it's been for over 100 years. But that doesn't help the situation either. And I talk about that in my presentation. We need to wrap our arms around that. We need to. That to me is a white elephant in the room. It absolutely is.
We need to get our heads out of the sand and get them back in the game and realize this for what it is. It's a national problem. And it's in your firehouse because those very people, that's where they came from. And again, it's just part of doing due diligence and protecting yourself and your organization from any liability associated with.
Yeah.
So if you're doing all these
your
things,
reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing all these things, then God forbid there is a negative event and there is a wreck. And your actions are put under a microscope and you are called into court, wouldn't it be much better to bring this individual's driving folder and try to show to the court and others that you've been responsible and you have a good program and that it truly was just an accident, or do you want to go in with your checkbook and just ask how much? The choices are stark and very different, and how you culturally and organizationally address this is going to be whether it's going to turn out fairly good or not well at all.
Absolutely. And, it clears something up for me, too, when we talk about this liability. One thing I seem to remember learning as a young firefighter, as I became a young officer, is the fact that the person in that right seat could find themselves subject to persecution if there's an accident and he or she didn't do everything in their power to make sure that driver was driving with due regard and following the established policies and procedures. Is that true?
Well, it depends in what court we are. If you are strictly in a civil court looking to protect your assets or from somebody wanting your assets, that could be true depending on how your procedures are written that may result in the officer being held accountable. However, criminally, the motor vehicle traffic law in the New York State or any other state, okay, there are no provisions in the vehicle and traffic law to hold the captain or the lieutenant or the fire chief responsible for bad driving. That responsibility is solely rests on the shoulders of the driver. Okay? Take, for instance, our new seatbelt law in New York State. And then you look at the standard. The NFPA standard is clear. It says that the driver cannot engage the fire truck in any gear, until the driver is assured that everybody on board the truck is properly dressed and seated and belted in an approved position. And then people will tell us that, well, it's just a standard. If you are, particularly in New York State, there was an event that happened on September 15th, 2001, 4 days after the World Trade Center collapsed, and over almost 3,000 people were murdered and 343 of my colleagues. With that said, the event 4 days later was almost dwarfed by what was going on nationally. And it was an event in Lairdsville, New York, where an assistant fire chief served time in jail for not following the NFPA live burn standard.
Right.
And it was a monumental case, Chief, because up till that point in time, the NFPA standards were used for people to sue us in civil court or for us to sue each other, firefighters suing firefighters. At no time in this country's history before Lairdsville had a standard been used, an NFPA standard used, to criminally prosecute one of us and put us in jail. And that was a court precedent-setting case, and I've been rattling that saber ever since that day, trying to educate people. One of the things that the fire chief that was convicted said, he had no idea what the NFPA was. Well, now you know.
Now you know. And again, that's
now
part
you
of
know
being
it's a little late.
You got to be aware. You want to wear the white helmet. You want to say you're a firefighter, and you want to become an officer or whatever. You got to be aware. You can't, as you said earlier, bury your head in the sand. You've got to know what's going on. And again, folks, we're listening to Fire Engineering Talk Radio and the Professional Volunteer Fire Service. Tom Merrill here with my very special guest, Mike Wilbur, talking all things driver safety. And a couple key things, Mike, that I want to bring up. And again, we could talk standards and SOPs or SOGs and recommended procedures all night long. A couple big ones to me that I can't believe we still have to harp on. I think I have four big ones. And they're simple, but you still read about things not being done. Seatbelts, spotters, stopping at red lights and sirens, and the new one, texting. Wow.
Right.
We still have to talk about all this stuff, don't we? Let's start with seatbelts. Seatbelts has been a nightmare trying to get that enforced, and I know they're making seatbelts bigger and easier to grab now and connect, and I think New York City led the way with experimentation on that, and are you seeing progress? I think our younger people are doing a better job at it.
Well, and here's why. I was actually involved with the seatbelt project in New York City. And after we got all the rigs retrofitted with seatbelts that actually worked, that were firefighter friendly, it was like, now what do we do? And what are we going to do to change the culture where at one point in the FDNY, and we had the same seatbelt policy as everybody must be seated and belted, on a good day we had a compliance rate of maybe 1%. And now certainly after all the work done, there is, certainly far, far better than that, for sure. In fact, it was interesting. My wife and I were in Manhattan going to a show, and 6 Engine went by us, and my wife exclaimed to me, "Look they're all wearing your seatbelts." And it
you
was
got
like,
her on it too.
yeah, I got it. She was like in tune with that as well. One of the things that I said in a meeting with the chief of operations and the chief of safety, if you are heavy-handed now after we get these seatbelts in and start hooking people up and taking vacation time away because they don't have seatbelts on, you're going to have a very negative reaction, and you may kill this initiative altogether. And it's a question I ask them, and I'll ask your audience. How much time in the fire school that you conduct do you spend on teaching people how to properly ride on your fire trucks, including the use of seatbelts? And in most cases, it's zero. Well, how can you expect anybody to do it right if you haven't properly trained them? And you can't take anything for granted. So part of that has to start at the training academy in New York City, and we're going to properly train people on how to get geared up and properly ride on a New York City fire truck. So that's
Mike,
part
you know
of
what? I got to tell you something. I've said several times now, there's a drill night in the volunteer fire. All right, winter's coming. There's a great inside drill. I said, and I had to learn this when I got out after 15 years as a chief officer, and then had to go back onto riding the rig as a volunteer a few years ago. I actually had to say to him, "Whoa, I got to practice this. I'm out of practice." There's a drill right there. Properly donning your gear, getting on the rig, buckling up, and getting the SCBA on properly. There's a great drill. And you're going to stumble a few times. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what drill and training's all about. Boom. Great drill night, people. Great drill topic there.
And if you as the chief expect people to wear seatbelts, how can you fulfill that expectation if you never train anybody?
Yep.
You have to train
because
people.
They think it's like getting in a car and putting the seatbelt on.
And it's
people,
not.
They shouldn't have to train on that. It's a natural thing. No, you do need to practice.
Right. And the second thing is that I told my bosses, I said, we didn't get this screwed up overnight. But the fact that you just spent the better part of $1 million and put new seatbelts in all the trucks, and I helped you, it isn't going to cure it overnight either. But one of the things that you can leverage is this. In the next 4 to 6 years, you're going to hire 3,000 new employees in the FDNY. And all those employees, and this goes to the volunteer side as well, all the 20-something-year-olds that you're going to elect to membership this year all have one thing in common. And what is it?
They've all been trained to wear seatbelts in the cars.
They have never been in a moving vehicle in their lives without having a seatbelt on.
That's true.
Ever. Okay? Yeah. And we need to leverage that.
Yeah, they don't get this position when they join the fire company.
Right. There's no free pass here. What you do in your car is exactly what you're going to do on the truck.
Now, this new law in New York, is that only for volunteers? I believe it is.
Sadly, it is. And it's funny because when I was doing the seatbelts in New York, my safety chief came to me, who was my boss at the time in the project, and said, "What is this?" And it was something that I believe FASNY put together in association with the state chiefs, and it just had volunteers, and we wanted to include everybody, and that obviously that change in the legislation never took hold, so it's just for volunteers, and that's pretty sad.
Wow. Yeah.
That's pretty sad.
Yeah, definitely. And along with seatbelts, another, you don't see a lot of maybe fatalities this way. Maybe there are, but there's still every one of them to me is preventable, and that's the lack of spotters when backing up apparatus. I personally almost saw one of our members get run over. He didn't, thank God, and it made me refocus on that policy that we've always had. But that's another must-have policy. Would you agree?
It is, and we end up killing somebody, believe it or not, still about once every other year.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote an article, and I spent 40, 50 hours on that article. And one of my good accounts for training is Edwards Air Force Base out in California in the Mojave Desert. And they have several abandoned runways, and that's where we do the driver training. And I noticed all those guys backed up the trucks the same way and used the same hand signals. So I'm an inquiring mind. I want to know. Well, it comes that they're all from the military, and the military has a 35-page bulletin just on hand signals. So we took 11 of them that were appropriate for the fire service. I took pictures of these guys doing them in the proper spot, proper hand signals, did one of the biggest, best articles that I ever did. It ran in a magazine, and 30 days later, somebody backed over a fire chief in Wisconsin while they were backing the truck in and killed him. And it's like I just screamed at the computer, isn't anybody paying attention and reading any of this stuff? And it's just so
it's
frustrating. It is.
Yeah. Matter of fact, there was just an article last year in Illinois, a very poignant article written by an interview with a firefighter in Illinois who backed over and killed his fire chief. And it's the article. He just says it's something he's going to have to live with the rest of his life. It was totally his responsibility, and if he just took 10 more seconds to find a spotter, his friend, as well as his fire chief, would still be alive. Very poignant reminder. And spotters are a must. We can't get such tunnel vision and be in such a hurry that the repercussion is the death of one of our comrades or even a citizen. It just can't be. So the importance of a good, solid, and enforced spotter policy, it just can't be overemphasized.
In my opinion, I'm a pretty forgiving guy. There is no reason in this country that any fire truck should ever get in an accident in reverse, ever.
Cameras in vehicles today as well.
With everything.
And I know some, within. And would you even recommend, I think sometimes, and maybe you can't now, but back in the day, I know some committees were quick to throw cameras out of the spec because of cost. I don't know if you can do that today with the new specs, but I like cameras. I know some people think you're not as diligent then. I disagree. I just think it's another tool in the toolbox to use.
Well, and I think that's the attitude, Chief, that we have to have. If I'm back there spotting for you, I don't want you watching the TV. But can you refer to it as you back up? Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes.
And like you said, it's just one more tool. There's another one. It's called backstops. It's a rubber pressure-sensitive bumper that if you get in reverse and the back step hits something, that it'll lock the truck right up. But then you look at some of the trucks now, and with the ladders past the back step and the rear intake past the back step, then that's kind of a waste of money because you're going to whack the rear intake of the ladder way before you whack the backstops and stop the truck. So you have to be careful when you spec that out.
And we still need to talk to our people and reinforce with them the importance of stopping at red lights and stop signs, no questions asked. We've seen the videos. Videos are everywhere today. There's cameras everywhere. And they'll catch you if you say I had a green light and you didn't. They're going to catch you. And again, another tragedy is when we have these vehicles going through red lights without stopping. And there's been far too many tragedies in that regard as well. And
what I'm seeing, and there's an epidemic in this country, is emergency vehicles running into emergency vehicles. I have a whole 3-hour program. I call it Racing to Death. We're in such a hurry and have such disregard and such tunnel vision that we're actually running into each other. And
it just happened in my town with the police, or in my city in Buffalo a few months ago. They had a very, very serious accident with 2 responding police cars at an intersection. Do you have a recommended policy? I'll tell you what the policy is in our department, and I'm not saying it's the right policy. It's something, again, here we go. This is what was taught to me by our senior members back in the 80s, and then I passed it on, and other people are still passing it on today. If 2 vehicles from our department, it would usually be a chief vehicle coming to the intersection at the same time as one of our fire apparatus or another chief's vehicle, whoever has the green light would be given the right of way, because someone has to. They're both slowing down. One should be stopping anyway because they have the red light. Whoever has the green light given the right of way. Is there an easy policy for something like that you see, or what do you talk about?
Well, yeah. If you have a red light, you got to stop. And even now, with as much inattentive driving, and I know that's one of the things that you're going to talk about. Whether you have people texting in the car or reading in the car or the radio up too high or talking on the phone or one of my worst inattentive driving several years ago in Ohio was a woman who bounced off a pumper at an accident scene and kept going, and the cops chased her down the road a ways. And what was she doing? She was breastfeeding her infant while she was trying to drive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was bad. And then I got people just tend to outdo each other. And then any of your listeners that want to Google the name Megan Barnes. Megan Barnes was shaving her privates on the way to a date with another man while her ex-husband held the steering wheel and ran 45 miles an hour into the back of somebody.
Oh, my goodness.
So, yeah.
Can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, you really can't make it up. And those are people that, while you're in your fire truck or fire chief's car or police car or ambulance, those are the people that you're driving around. And, your road as a first responder is paved with good intentions. You're there to help, rescue, put out fires, provide medical intervention for people that are sick. All this stuff, it's all great stuff. But the people that are driving around are just have become so inattentive now that even a green light at an intersection you can't necessarily take for granted. You want to be covering the brake. And people say, you might waste time. You know what? If it takes another minute to get to this run safely, it beats the alternative, which is not getting there at all. And your job behind that wheel is to make sure that you get help and to render aid as quickly, but the caveat is as safely too as you can. And you can't replace one with the other.
And you talk about distractions and it even our own members being distracted. Now, I happen to have 4 daughters, and I know how glued they are to their smartphones, and I think they represent the common American young adult and youth today. And so we're bringing these people into our firehouses as well. And it's hard enough to engage them in conversation like you and I are engaging in right now without every minute them glancing at their phone because it's dinging or pinging or binging. They're getting a tweet or they're getting a text or a notification that they got an email. And now we are strained trying to teach them that they can't be doing that when they're driving their personal vehicle. So we know our youth everybody's out there doing it. I see it every day. But now we're taking these cell phones into our fire apparatus, and we may be seeing our volunteer firefighters or firefighters in general doing it driving or not, the distraction is there, both with the driving public and our own members, whether a crew member or the driver of the apparatus.
That's absolutely correct. One of the things that I do in my driving class, I have a video clip of a career ambulance person, and she is in a private ambulance, a rural metro AMR kind of situation, and she knows she's on film. There's a camera pointing out that gives her GPS location and her speed. There's a camera pointing at her, and there's actually a camera in the back pointing at the medic giving patient care. And she's texting behind the wheel. And she goes to a yellow light, texting, and then drives into a car that's 3 cars back from a stopped school bus at 31 miles an hour with a patient in the back. And it's all caught on tape. And so what I do in my class is I pick somebody and I say, who's a captain or a lieutenant? And, I'll get somebody and I say, okay, this is your ambulance, this is your employee. As part of the condition of their employment, they've been told that they're on film. They wreck the ambulance, you come back and download this, what do you do? And in most cases, the answer is they're fired. It's easy. You're fired. Fine. Then I play another video clip. It's a fire truck with a firefighter behind the wheel with others on board the truck texting while they're going to a run. And then I say to the captain, or the lieutenant, what do you do with it? Well, no. I don't know. You just fired. Well, he didn't wreck. Yeah, not yet.
Yeah.
But
right.
It's
you get away
happen.
with it for so often, and
it's going to happen. So, to all your listeners out here, I can't urge you strongly enough when it comes to this. As a company officer, if I'm in Snyder and I catch my driver texting, what do you have written down as a procedure that can cause me to take action? And in most places, there's no procedure. And don't tell me it's a New York State law. That's a vehicle and traffic law, and I'm not a cop. I am your company officer. What, as an organization, have you written down on paper where I can take the driver and enact some kind of immediate discipline on this person for driving and texting? Okay. And in a lot of cases, they'll write on the paper, you can't text and drive. Well, then what? Well, then nobody has anything to offer after that. So it's really a foolhardy policy. If you are going to write down no texting and driving in the XYZ fire department, and then you have to have a list of steps that you give the company or chief officer that's willing to take, like you're suspended for 30 days the first time, you don't ever drive again the second time, whatever it is. But you have to have something written on paper and give your company and chief officers tools in which to handle this new problem that's just explosive.
Yep, there you go, people. Again, it's one thing to say you can't do it, but we need to continue to think along the lines of what we're going to do if they do it. And again, we're not looking to be baddies. One of the great expressions is catch them doing something right, and of course that plays into the professional equation. Of course we'd like to do that, but we got to make them understand the dangers and the repercussions of actions like that. And another thing I like to point out to members too is just expect that the driving public isn't going to do what you want them to do. They are going to slam their brakes on. They're not going to pull all the way over to the right or to the left. They're just going to do things that you need to. They're not going to do what you want them to do when you're coming behind them in that emergency vehicle. And one of the things that can impact your reputation as a professional department with your community members is how your members react. And we've all seen the pictures, and I've personally seen my own members, as probably most of you have, basically hanging out windows and flipping the middle finger and yelling expletives at these drivers, and it does nobody any good to do things like that. And I understand we have a threshold and sometimes we cross it, but I think it needs to be part of our program, part of our training with our members, part of our recertification is, hey, remember, we can be doing everything correctly, we can be sounding the siren, we can be driving with due regard, but Mrs. or Mr. or Mrs. Smith is still going to slam their brake on, they're still not going to hear you to the last second, they might still pull in front of you. Be ready and handle it professionally.
Right, because what's different now than when we cut our teeth back in the 70s and 80s? What's the biggest difference now? Being a firefighter and a driver and officer today than it was 30 or 40 years ago?
Well, there's many more distractions. The cars are tighter. They can't hear you coming.
You are going to be on film.
Okay. Yes, you
Whatever
will.
you do, we're going to have a videotape of it.
That's true.
And,
That's true.
You know, I teach all my classes as just a general deployment and public interaction. When you are in a fire truck, when you have your favorite FD job shirt on, you need to conduct yourself with the highest order of professionalism and integrity, because you are an attraction to everybody.
Yes.
And you will be on film. So whether you're texting behind the wheel or whether you're out drinking at the local watering hole with your job shirt on, bringing discredit to yourself and the department that shirt that you're wearing, that people have sacrificed and in some case made the ultimate sacrifice for you to wear that shirt, you need to conduct yourself with the highest order of professionalism and integrity, because you will be on film, and anything that you do that's going to adversely affect your standing within a department or community, somebody's going to have it. And
well said, Mike. And again, I know we've been talking for over an hour and a half now, and I just want to remind our listeners, this is Fire Engineering Talk Radio. This is the Professional Volunteer Fire Service. I'm Tom Merrill, and glad I have Mike Wilbur with me tonight, talking about so many important topics regarding driving programs and driving safely. And if you'd like to call in, there's still time. It's 760-454-8852. And Mike, I hope you can stick with me for a few more minutes here. I know you were under the weather recently, and I hope you can hang in there with me, because I have one more, or maybe a couple more, but definitely one more really important thing I want to cover with you. And I'll start off with a quote I used in my professional volunteer class, and in some cases it's met with controversy, and I would love to get your take on it. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Just because your Minuter pager goes off or your rooftop siren wails does not mean you have to drive with lights and sirens on. Would you agree with that?
That's absolutely correct. And it's funny because we've talked tonight about two great leaders, Mark Bayshaw with the Prince George's County Fire Department and Chief Charles Hood from the San Antonio Fire Department. And there's a third chief that we're going to add into that group. And his name was Neil Stefanix. And Neil was the chief in St. Louis Fire Department back in 1993. St. Louis at that time, I believe, had 36 companies. And in a February day, 4 of his apparatus wrecked in one day. And he said, that's it. We cannot keep doing it the way we've been doing it. We're not going to change for the sake of change, but we need to change our response policies, because what we're doing right now, quite frankly, it's not working for us anymore. And so Chief Stefanix came up with the first modified response policy called On the Quiet. And he picked out about 20 or so responses that do not require the use of lights and sirens. gas leaks, water leaks, automatic alarms, wires down, smoke detectors going off, all these things that have traditionally just been not fires. And you can play the what-if game all you want, but the reality is that take an automatic alarm, for instance. How many automatic alarms are we all going to? And the number is off the charts. Everybody's going to a ton. How many of those have actually been fires? And what we're doing here, Chief, when we talk about modified response, we're playing the odds here. And the odds are greater that you're going to wreck the truck going to one of these than it actually being a working fire. That's the reality. It's a statistical reality. It's not going away anytime soon. And not only going to the automatic alarm, but how often have you gone to an automatic alarm and the joint's been on fire and you show up and say, holy cow, they weren't kidding this time? Almost always you will get some kind of notification en route, whether it's, we were just kidding, it's an alarm malfunction, or, babe, there's smoke showing, you better step it up.
Right. Yep.
So only
the stats
in the
are there
rarest...
from the NFPA.
Pardon?
The stats are there from the NFPA. It's something like 90% are false alarms, and out of the remaining 10%, 90% of those could be handled with one rig because it's food on the stove or something like that. I don't know if those are the correct numbers, but it's close to that.
Right. And the reality...
At the same time, you don't... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, at the same time, I am in no way, and I know you're in no way trying to dismiss the seriousness of the business and that we still treat these calls seriously. We still gear up and have our firefighters prepared and ready to go. That plays into the whole professional equation in treating this job with the respect that it deserves and to be as prepared as possible. And that's up to good, solid leadership, company officers, truck officers, making their people ready to go, making sure they're ready to go. Even though we may be responding in a quiet mode, we're still ready. We're still ready.
That's correct. And there's a big difference in going to help somebody and an emergency run. There's an awful lot of times that we go help people on their worst day, but it's not an emergency. And it gives you no right as an organization or a driver to put lights and sirens on and run people off the road and run people over. The ends don't justify the means. If you look at most vehicle and traffic laws, there's this term, and you used it a couple times in this show already. When you put the lights and sirens on, you have an obligation as an emergency vehicle operator to drive with due regard for the safety of all other users of the highway. That means that when you make the conscious decision to put those lights and sirens on, and you have to drive under law with due regard, the law is telling you you must drive better than everybody else. Is it fair given the size of your vehicles and the emergency mission that you could potentially be on? No, but life isn't fair. If you take that same response and go into non-emergency mode and drive down the road as just a regular truck, the statute does not say that you have to drive with due regard, and so your driving is not held to that higher standard. So every time that you can leave the firehouse under a modified response policy, you have cut your liability by 1,000%, and you have cut your risk by 1,000%, and you have cut your own personal stress as a driver by 1,000%. And so it makes for a better, all safer operation. You're more in tune with helping people when you show up.
And you know what one of the biggest arguments against it is?
What's
and
that,
I've heard it. I'll never get my volunteers to go to the firehouse if they can't get on the truck and put the lights and sirens on. I say tell that to the family whose car you just broadsided when the 11 o'clock news interviews. You use that as a reason that You went, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of going to these calls. Heck, and is it Clark County? Is it Nevada that doesn't even go to automatic alarms anymore? Am I right with that Las Vegas area?
I'm not sure about that. That it could very well be, but
I think they don't even go unless there's a backup phone call.
Yeah, I mean it's just so out of control anymore.
Yeah.
You're absolutely correct, and we needed to do something. And again, we're not changing for the sake of change. We're changing because what we were doing, and we talked about all those issues: the inattentive driving, the lack of seatbelts. And all those things manifest themselves in these kind of runs where not every run is an emergency. People do need our help. It is serious. We do treat it with the professionalism and the seriousness just like any other call. We just don't need the lights and the noisemakers to do it and all the stress. And it's funny that you mentioned this entitlement with volunteers. I had a department that put a booster reel on a ladder truck. And it's the only ladder truck in this small city, and it's the only ladder truck for 30 miles in any given direction. And this is a department that had 5 volunteer engines, a ladder truck, and a heavy rescue. And I quizzed the fire chief. I said, why did you do that? Well, we need to keep the interest up in the truck company, so we send them to brush fires. I said, a couple things. First, as a volunteer firefighter, or a career firefighter for that matter, we're not here to keep your interest up. This is not a game. Okay, this is a job. The only thing you did when you volunteered is to volunteer for this job. When you get done putting your hand down on your first night, the volunteer part of this is over. And now it's a job. And it's part of that culture and that professionalism that we talked earlier about in the show. So we're not here to entertain you. We're not here to keep your spirits up. This is part of a very serious job with very expensive equipment, and we really care about taking you and sending you back home to your family after you get done volunteering your time to do it. So that was my first comment. And the second comment was, you have the only ladder truck for 20 miles around in any given direction. If you wreck that going to a brush fire on Tuesday because you want to keep everybody in the truck company's interest up, and little old ladies are jumping out of the 4th floor of the nursing home on Friday because the ladder's out for repairs, Bozo the Clown could be the attorney for the nursing home people and win millions and take it to the cleaners.
Yeah, we got to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. And again, not trying to downplay the importance of going on these calls. It's just doing things, driving with due regard, and modifying how we're doing things today, because it is about to be 2016, and times are different.
Right. We're a very litigious society. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, we have a poster child in our area from 1986 where an apparatus was relocating on a mutual aid, and it was going to stand by at a firehouse, and it was going in a hot response mode to stand by in the firehouse and hit a car, I believe, but near an amusement park in our area, about a half hour from here. And it hit a car with a family and it turning into the amusement park. And I believe it was a father and his 8-year-old daughter, and then the friend's 8-year-old friend were killed by a fire apparatus responding lights and sirens to stand by at a firehouse.
That's
in my
correct.
mind, unless there's a compelling reason, you shouldn't be going lights and sirens to stand by and relocate.
How can you justify an incident like that when you're taking a fire truck from a full fire station and putting it into an empty one? There's nothing emergent about that at all. And in that particular case, it was worse because the initial department was at an abandoned silo fire. The father was taking his daughter and friends to the amusement park, to the water park, for a birthday party. when that operator going lights and sirens to a standby went through the intersection and killed them. And then there's even another whole topic that you could spend a whole show on as to what happened to that driver. Do you know what happened to that driver after?
I don't. No, I don't.
Okay, what happened, that driver was shunned not only by the fire department, but by his community. And I believe, and as I recall, that driver, about 2 years after the incident, sat on the front porch of his house on Main Street and put a shotgun under his chin.
Horrible.
And committed suicide.
Horrible.
And so, yeah.
Oh, my God.
So what are we doing when you, as an operator, join this very exclusive club of hurting or killing somebody with a fire truck? What are we doing nationally to start that conversation and to get that person help? Because not only did the father and a couple kids die that day, but actually there were 4 deaths, and that was the operator that caused it all. Yeah, and so I know Chief Goldfeder and others, and certainly I'm going to continue that conversation as well on a national level. We are only scratching the surface as to how many firefighters have committed suicide over time. More than anybody in this business wants to even wrap their arms around and admit to, for a variety of reasons. But if you are one out there, a department that's gotten in a serious wreck, what are you doing to help that driver and that crew through that very traumatic? And I don't think we realize as a group, when a civilian runs over a civilian and kills him, it's bad. When you take a fire truck and do that, it becomes far worse. Why? Because we as firefighters have taken a Hippocratic oath. We have sworn to protect property and save lives, not take them.
Right.
And so when we take one in the performance of our duty, it becomes a psychological burden that almost is beyond belief.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to continue that discussion, whether it's firefighters about driving, but there are any number of firefighters that have committed suicide over time.
It is, and you're starting to see more and more attention directed on the need to recognize the stress and the emotional duress that some of our members, our valuable members, are under. Recognize signs and symptoms and try and get them some help, and hopefully we can make some progress on that, because it is definitely something you're reading more about and seeing more right. with it. And with that, Mike, I think you mentioned there's some other things we could talk about, and I'm going to go out on a limb here because I know how hard it was to get our schedules to coincide, but I'm going to invite you to come back on a future show because I have probably another 2 hours worth of questions for you. Would we, if we could make it work in a future episode next year, would you be willing to come back?
Absolutely, Chief. I'd love to. I had a great time. I think you're providing an invaluable service to the brothers and sisters on the volunteer side of the house. And I don't think a lot of people realize, but many career firefighters are volunteers as well, or have gotten their start as volunteers. So one particular discipline isn't necessarily exclusive to the other. I know that most of my friends, Chief Salka, who many of you know, were both career and volunteer. Chief Goldfeder was a career and volunteer person, and the list of notable fire service leaders on the national level, the list goes on and on.
Yep.
As relates to
so
that.
Right. And Mike, if people wanted to reach out to you, I mentioned your website earlier, but you offer so much valuable training, and as you said earlier, we're spending $1.4 million, $1.5 million on these these apparatus, and we are not training with them nearly as much as we need to. But if people wanted to reach out to you, pick your brain, get some ideas, or invite you in to offer one of your training classes, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Okay. It's www.emergencywehicleresponse.com. On the left side of the home page is a bar that says Contact Us. Fill it out with your contact information and what you would like to talk about or what your inquiry or question is. I answer each and every one. I may not be the same time zone as you, but as soon as time permits, I answer all my phone calls and all inquiries and all emails. And another way, and you had mentioned it early on, I am, along with my crew, are doing a hot training class at the great FDIC in April of next year. It's an aerial and engine placement and operations class. We've changed it up a little bit. For years, we just had aerial apparatus that we trained on, and now we're going to introduce a couple of engines, and we're going to actually have students and officers. We're going to have buildings, and we're going to have group discussions on how we're going to place each individual unit and tactically and strategically how that's going to work out for us. So it's something new. We're very excited about that program. We encourage everybody to come and join us. Our class generally fills up rather quickly, so please go to the Fire Engineering FDIC website and seek that out and sign up and get your spot early because
and remember, there's scholarships available too. Scholarship opportunities you can apply for or recommend people for.
Yeah, we'd love to have you. We're excited. My crew's excited. It's something entirely new that we're trying. We think it's going to be really good. And like I said, there's only just a bunch of spots, and they go quickly. Generally, we tend to sell out. So, get online early and reserve your spot. It's going to be quite a good class to take in.
Oh, fantastic. Excellent. There's so much more I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about specking apparatus and one of my pet peeves. Now, you've never met me personally, but I'm a little on the short side. And I take a real interest in hose bed height. And I can't believe the height some of these hose beds are today. And so I'd like to pick your brain on that, and mid-mount versus rear mount, and that great controversy, if it is even a controversy, and the importance of paying attention, as we say to this fire service, understanding recalls and how you got to watch out for recalls. And there's been some big recalls in the fire service over the last few years, and just so many other things that we could talk about. So I know we could fill another show.
Oh, absolutely, and I look forward to the opportunity. It's been great from my family to all the fire service brother and sisters out there. Have the happiest and healthiest of holiday seasons, and we'll look forward, Chief, to getting back together with you early in 2016, and we can do this again. We have a lot more to talk about.
Oh, absolutely, and I can't thank you enough for being on the show tonight, and I wish you and your family and all your fellow firefighters and all your people that you deal with a happy and healthy holiday season, and I look forward to meeting up with you in Indianapolis, if not sooner.
Thank you very much, Chief.
All right, Mike, thank you very much, and again, I just want to, I can't thank him enough. What a great show. So much great information. Please reach out to Mike if you have any questions. You can reach out to me, and I'll put you in touch with him if you're having trouble. I'm on Facebook, Tom Merrill on Facebook, or the Professional Volunteer Fire Department Facebook page. And you can email me at tamerrill63@AOL.com. If you'd like me to bring my presentation out to you, that would be fantastic. My next show will be all the way in February. It'll be Tuesday, February 2nd. And I just want to thank you again for listening in. And as I sign off tonight, I do have to take a moment like I do every show and just talk about a couple last-minute things. First of all, again, I wish you and your family an extremely happy and healthy holiday season. Take the time to be thankful for your family and your loved ones and your brothers and sisters at the firehouse and everybody you share this incredible fire service heritage with. Appreciate that unique bond that unites all of us, and just enjoy the holiday season. And I just want to take a minute to remember and to pay honor to some of the firefighters and citizens alike who perished during the month of December over the previous decades in American history. And all too often, you see, December is a month filled with just incredible stories and examples of firefighter sacrifice. It's just a month filled with significant dates that should resonate with all firefighters, and we should never forget the fires, the firefighters, and even those civilians they were trying so very hard to protect and to save. And hopefully we learn from their sacrifice, and we learn from what they did, and that's what they would want. And think about it. December is a month of holiday, the holiday season. You're with your family, with your loved ones. People are preparing for the holidays, and all too often in our history there's been some just awful stories of sacrifice. But at the same time, we can't forget these awful stories. We need to remember, and it's as recent as yesterday in Chicago, losing a brother firefighter, Daniel Capuano, 42 years of age, 15 years on the job, killed in the warehouse fire yesterday when he fell down an elevator shaft. A beautiful family, a wife and 3 children, and he made the ultimate sacrifice yesterday, and we just can't forget him. And Chicago is no stranger to these stories. I mean, all the way back in 1958, the Our Lady of Angels fire, where 92 children and 4 nuns lost their life on December 1st, 1958. And back in Chicago in 2010, two firefighters were killed in a collapse. And that was on the 100th anniversary of the Union Stockyard fire in Chicago that killed 21 firefighters. Yes, December is a tragic month. In my own town in Buffalo, New York, 5 firefighters killed in December of 1983 in a horrific propane explosion. 4 firefighters killed on December 20th, 1991 in Breckenridge, Pennsylvania, when they were trapped in a partial floor collapse. And in December of 1999, 2 horrible tragedies that still resonate with us. We all know the story of the Worcester, Massachusetts fire on December 3rd at the cold storage facility, where 6 firefighters were killed, and another fire in 1999 in Keokuk, Iowa, where 3 firefighters and 3 children were killed in a horrific fire just 3 days before Christmas. Terrible, terrible tragedies. And even just a few years ago, not far from my hometown in Monroe County, New York, in the Rochester, New York area, in West Webster, New York, Christmas Eve, a routine response for a car fire. And unknowingly, the firefighters show up and are met with a person shooting at them, killing 2 of these responding firefighters, one who was also a local police lieutenant and the other a 911 dispatcher. 2 volunteer firefighters going to a routine car fire on Christmas Eve and shot down in the line of duty. I ask you to share these stories so our younger firefighters understand our history, so we are all reminded of these losses, of these stories of sacrifice, and so we may learn from these stories and maybe better protect ourselves. Because by doing that, that is what they would want, and we are honoring them, honoring their memory. And I ask you all to do that as we enter the holiday season. And as I do every month or every show, I'm going to end with my shout-out. And as you know, since I started doing these when I started the show last year, I always give a shout-out to a special department or a special volunteer firefighter for something they did maybe in the line of duty, maybe personally, but something they did to exemplify the professional spirit of the American firefighter. Well, for the first time tonight, I'm not going to give a shout-out to a particular firefighter or a particular department. I'm going to give a shout-out to a little 8-year-old girl who a few years ago lost almost her whole family, her father and 3 siblings, in a horrific fire that left her with some really bad burns, disfiguring burns. But you know what? It didn't disfigure her spirit. She's the most incredible, beautiful young girl that I've seen in a long, long time. So her aunt was with her in a store, and they bought a little Christmas tree card holder from a little thrift shop. And a little 8-year-old girl, Sapphire Terry is her name, said to her aunt that she was hoping she could get enough cards to fill this Christmas tree holder. Now, this poor girl has been through so much. She's severely disfigured. I believe she lost an arm, and every day is a battle for her just to get through the day. And she wants to receive Christmas cards. Well, she met a member of a motorcycle group because they were trying to raise money for her new family who was helping her, trying to raise money to help her deal with her medical expenses. And they've been very successful in that. But they heard about how Sapphire really only wanted Christmas cards and put the word out. And put the word out nationally, and it spread like wildfire. And just today alone, or just one day this week, she received 195,000 cards and nearly 3,000 packages. People from as far away as China have sent to her. A 5-year-old boy in Hong Kong actually sent his favorite teddy bear to her with a note that said, "Let's be friends." They have since sent the teddy bear back with another teddy bear because it gets lonely on the long journey, saying, "Oh, we will be friends." It's an incredible story about a beautiful young girl who suffered a horrific loss and is in pain every day, and she wants Christmas cards to show that people love and support her, and the outpouring has been incredible. Over 300,000 letters received so far, this week receiving a trip to Disney World sponsored by a local company. And if you would like to send Sapphire Terry a Christmas card, P.O. Box 6126 in Schenectady, New York, 12306. The fire was in the Schenectady area where she lives. It was a few years ago. And you know what? This girl deserves so much more than my little shout-out. But as the holiday season approaches, just look at her story, send her a card, let her know that people are behind her, people love her, people support her, and admire that spirit that this 8-year-old child shows. And with that, people, I'd like to thank you for joining in on the show tonight. I want you to remember how great it is to be a firefighter. And as we start off 2016, do everything in your power to exemplify that professional volunteer spirit. And remember, professional has nothing to do with earning that paycheck. It has everything to do with delivering competent and compassionate service and taking care of not only our customers, but our own members as well. And it's all of our duty and responsibility, paid or volunteer, to do that. Have a great holiday season. Thank you for joining in tonight. Thank you to Mike Wilbur for what was a truly great show. I promise we'll get him back again. God bless, and we'll talk to you in February. Thank you very much.